What are the worst recalls that you need to be aware of before you buy a car? That's what we're going to find out. Welcome to Car Up Corner, where we help you, the consumer, master the process of car buying and car ownership. For this video, I'm going to share 10 of the most severe and widespread safety recalls that might make you think twice about certain vehicles. Recalls are issued when a car manufacturer or the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, discover a problem with a batch of vehicles that's related to safety. While recalls are very common and some are no cause for alarm, there are others that are extremely dangerous and could result in major issues, injury, or even death. So to find out what are the worst and most common recalls and the vehicles that are affected, make sure to stick around until the end of this video. And if you enjoy and get value out of this video, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notifications. I post 2 videos a week, always straight to the point, valuable car buying advice designed to help you, the consumer. So let's start this list off with the first recall, which is Tesla and its self-driving capability. Full self-driving, like the feature that's available on Tesla, is one of the most polarizing autonomous driving systems on the market. It has its supporters and detractors, but this recall certainly calls into question the system's safety. 363,000 Teslas have been recalled for a faulty full self-driving capability feature, which according to NHTSA may act unsafe while driving. NHTSA has a few issues with how this feature performs in certain situations, like at intersections and during stop-and-go driving. Thankfully, this issue is rare and no injuries or deaths have been reported as a direct result of this specific issue. But sadly, this is far from the only recall for Tesla, which received 20 recalls in all of 2022, which accounted for 5% of the total recalls across the industry. But there are even more serious recalls out there, so let's move on to the next vehicle on the list, which is the Jeep Wrangler and the exploding clutch plate recall. Jeep has initiated a recall campaign over a clutch plate in 2018 to 2023 Wranglers and Gladiators that could overheat. And in the most extreme case, the clutch could overheat due to friction. And if that happens, the plate can rapidly fracture with enough force to crack or even puncture the transmission case, which would lead to a complete transmission replacement. Now obviously this is a very significant recall, one that has affected 70,000 vehicles. And unfortunately, Jeep is a manufacturer that's not exactly known for having the best customer service. I've actually experienced their customer service firsthand with this issue, helping one consumer who had this exact problem, and Jeep was refusing to do the recall repair, claiming that the owner had done the damage themselves by not shifting the vehicle properly, which is a possibility, but in the end, there was no doubt that it was Jeep's fault, and with enough fighting, they eventually agreed to fix the car. And unfortunately, it's not only the manual Wranglers that have been impacted by a very severe recall. Jeep has also recalled over 70,000 Wrangler 4xEs for 2 different issues, one for faulty high voltage battery packs, and also for engines that can spontaneously shut down while driving, which has led to a few injuries. And it's really no surprise to see this when you learn that Jeep and the entire Chrysler group had among the highest number of recalls in 2022. With 38 recalls, which was 10% of all recalls across the entire car industry. But it gets even better, so let's move on to the next vehicle on the list, which is the Subaru Ascent and the fire recall. There's a perception that Subarus are often bought by people who love the great outdoors, which might work out well because that's exactly where you might want to park your Ascent if you own one of these. Subaru is warning owners of the 2019 to 2022 Ascent to park their SUV outside. 287,000 Ascents have been recalled over a wiring issue on the PTC heater. This is a very serious recall which could potentially lead to a fire, so if you own an Ascent, make sure to have the recall done as soon as possible. And next up on the list, in the number 7 spot, we have the Chevrolet Bolt and the LG battery recall. This is quite a famous recall because back in 2021, GM had to recall almost every single Bolt that was manufactured, going all the way back to 2017. And they even had to stop production of the brand new 2021 models at that time. NHTSA issued the recall due to a manufacturing defect inside the battery pack, which in a very rare situation could potentially catch on fire. Now as mentioned, this was a very rare issue. Out of hundreds of thousands of Bolts that were manufactured, and also some Hyundai Konas as well, only a handful, a little over a dozen Bolts, actually caught on fire as a result of the defective batteries. And in the end, a lot of Bolt owners did make out extremely well because even those who owned a 6-year-old vehicle ended up getting a brand new battery pack, which would otherwise be a very expensive component to replace out of pocket if you ever did have a failure. But just like other manufacturers, GM did have a very high number of recalls in 2022, with 32 recalls, which accounted for 8% of all recalls across the entire industry. But incredibly, the next recall that we have at number 6 is potentially even worse, which is the BMW recall for engines that can potentially catch on fire. Now, this is an older recall affecting vehicles that were manufactured between 2006 and 2013, but it is a very widespread one affecting nearly 1 million vehicles, including the BMW 3 Series and 5 Series, and also the X3 and the X5. NHTSA says that the risk of fire occurs during driving or shortly after the car is parked, but BMW does claim that incidents are quite rare and still says it's okay to drive the vehicle even before the recall is done. And thankfully, there are no reported accidents or injuries as a result of this recall. But even so, if you own one of these vehicles, make sure that you have the recall repair done as soon as possible. And moving on to number 5 on the list, we have Kia and Hyundai with the dual clutch transmission recall. Both Hyundai and Kia have recalled 8 different vehicle models and over 122,000 vehicles as a result of an issue with the 8-speed dual clutch transmission. This recall affects several vehicles made between 2021 and 2022, but the most commonly affected ones include the Hyundai Santa Fe and the Hyundai Sonata, and also the Hyundai Elantra N, Hyundai Kona N, and the Kia Sorento. Now, I've heard of many different issues with this specific transmission, but in this case, the issue has to do with the electric oil pump, which, if faulty, could cause the vehicle to enter a limp mode. Thankfully, there have been no crashes or injuries as a result of this recall, but in the most extreme cases, if you have an affected vehicle, you might need to get a complete transmission replacement. Both Hyundai and Kia have been severely impacted by recalls as of late, with around 44 recalls in 2022, accounting for around 12% of the industry total. But sadly, that's nothing when compared to the next manufacturer, which is Ford, and the Ford Escape and Bronco fire recall. When it comes to recalls, Ford was the #1 manufacturer in 2022, with 67 recalls, accounting for 17% of the industry total. Now, there were a number of recalls during this time, but perhaps the most significant one involves the Ford Escape and the Ford Bronco Sport for a fire recall. The issue involves the 2020 to 2023 Ford Escape and Bronco Sports due to a leaking fuel injector on the 1.5 turbo 3-cylinder engine. Apparently, a crack is to blame for the fuel injector leak, which in the most extreme case could lead to an engine fire. 500,000 Escapes and Bronco Sports have been recalled as a result of this issue, and there have even been 54 reports of fires in vehicles with the 3-cylinder engine, including 4 with cracked fuel injectors. The issue is so severe that it's even led to a major class action lawsuit against Ford. And unfortunately, this fire recall is only one of many potential issues with the 1.5 turbo 3-cylinder engine, which is why I have long recommended avoiding the Escape and the Bronco Sport with this particular engine. And I would also say the same about the next recall, which is the Ram 1500 EcoDiesel fire recall. This recall affects the Ram 1500 with the EcoDiesel engine built between 2014 and 2019, and it affects over 100,000 vehicles manufactured during that time. The issue is potential cracks in the EGR system, which could lead to a coolant leak and eventually causing the engine to catch on fire. And unfortunately, there have been a number of fires as a result of this recall, including a few consumers with the Ram 1500 EcoDiesel that I've had to personally assist deal with the manufacturer. There's no question, in general, the EcoDiesel has been a very unreliable engine, and it has had a number of different reliability issues ever since it hit the market nearly a decade ago. And that brings us to recall number 2 on the list, which is arguably the biggest one of all, and that of course is the Takata airbag recall. There's no question, the Takata airbag recall is one of the largest recalls in modern history, affecting over 67 million vehicles across several different car manufacturers. It really seems that the vast majority of vehicles manufactured anywhere from 2001 all the way up to 2021 could potentially be affected by this recall. And in the most extreme case, in the event of an accident, these airbags will explode, causing injury to the passengers and potentially even death. Which is why it's so important to learn whether you own a vehicle that's been affected by the Takata airbag recall. And if so, make sure to contact a dealer right away, set up an appointment, and have the recall work done as soon as possible. And that brings us to the final and the biggest recall on this list, which is the Hyundai and Kia engine fire recall. There's no question, when it comes to recalls in modern history, there are very few that are larger and more significant than the engine fire recalls in many different Hyundai and Kia models. Several million Hyundai and Kia models manufactured between 2011 and 2021 are impacted. This primarily includes those with the 2-liter or 2.4-liter 4-cylinder engine, which was found in many different models including the sedans, small SUVs, and mid-sized SUVs across the lineups. But even though this recall primarily affects the 2-liter and 2.4-liter engines, other engines including the 1.6, the 2.4 turbo, and a few other engines are also impacted as well. The issue is that these engines were simply manufactured improperly, which could potentially lead to a complete engine failure, regardless of how well you maintain the vehicle, even with regular oil changes. And in some situations, these engines have also been known to catch on fire, which is something that has unfortunately happened to a lot of Hyundai and Kia owners, leading to a lot of bad publicity for the companies. And even though for the most part Hyundai and Kia have been fairly decent when it comes to issuing the recall work, I have had to deal with a lot of consumers who have had a very frustrating time trying to get an engine replacement out of these companies. And you certainly don't need to look very hard to find a lot of complaints online. So much like Chrysler Jeep, Hyundai and Kia are just not known for having the best customer service. Which I can see why, given that they're up to their head dealing with repairs left and right, while spending billions of dollars at the same time. But even though these are some of the most significant recalls, many different vehicles and virtually all manufacturers are affected by them at some point. So if you do own a vehicle that is impacted by a recall, make sure you set up an appointment with the dealership and have the repair done as soon as possible. Regardless of how old the vehicle is, the recall repair will always be done free of cost. So let me know what you thought of this video, and if you have any suggestions for any future car videos, just leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. You can also take a look at my other car videos by clicking these links over here. Make sure to follow me on TikTok and Instagram. And if you need additional car buying advice, recommendations, or help with getting a great deal on your next new car purchase, make sure to visit carhelpcanada.com. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.